Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to completely flip the script on everything you thought you knew about ADHD. We're peeling back the layers and diving deep into the medical history, the neurological realities, and honestly, the profoundly misunderstood lived experience of this condition.
Let's kick things off with a pretty wild question. For decades, society has stigmatized ADHD as just a learning disability, right? Or maybe a modern behavioral issue caused by way too much screen time. But what if we've been looking at it completely wrong this whole time? What if the exact traits we call a disorder today were actually vital adaptations?
Picture this. You're 100,000s of years ago. To survive, you absolutely need hyperfocus to track prey. You need the ability to make lightning-fast decisions when a predator suddenly jumps out. And you need explosive, high energy. You basically have to be a visual thinker and a massive risk-taker. But fast forward to today. Human society shifted. We built a world mostly designed for farmers, a world that rewards methodical, routine-driven, stationary work. So, this theory suggests that the exact traits that kept our ancestors alive when facing wild animals are now just completely misunderstood in a modern classroom or a corporate office block.
That brings us to part 1, the clinical reality and medical history.
Now, you might be thinking this hunter brain concept is just some new internet trend. Actually, scratch that. It's been recognized by medical science for a very long time. ADHD isn't just a modern excuse. We've literally been tracing this neurodevelopmental condition for over 2 centuries. All the way back in 1775, a German physician named Melchior Adam Weikart described a hyperactivity and inattention syndrome. By 1902, Sir George Frederick Still was giving medical lectures on it. Then, in 1937, Dr. Charles Bradley accidentally discovered that stimulants improve these traits. It was finally recognized in the DSM in 1968 and then officially named ADHD in 1987.
So what does this actually look like under the hood? It fundamentally comes down to executive dysfunction. It's a very real disruption in the brain's ability to regulate thought processes and goal-directed behavior. And this is heavily linked to physical changes in how the brain uses its dopamine and noradrenaline pathways. Plus, it's deeply genetic. We're talking about an incredibly high heritability rate of roughly 74%.
And when we look at how this manifests clinically, the data is just fascinating. It's not a one-size-fits-all thing. About 19% of people show mostly inattentive traits, like constantly losing items or struggling to focus. Another 19% show predominantly hyperactive-impulsive traits. But it turns out, the vast majority actually live with a combined type. A whopping 62% of people with ADHD experience the full spectrum of both inattentive and hyperactive traits.
Moving right along to part 2, the ADHD paralysis trap.
Despite all those clinical labels and brain pathways, the lived experience is so often far more complex and emotionally exhausting. Because of the constant criticism from a world built for farmers, people with ADHD often develop an intense sensitivity to rejection. It feels these absolutely heartbreaking internal monologues, feelings of being a failure or hating feeling different. People with ADHD are not lazy. They're often simply terrified of doing things wrong or failing to meet neurotypical standards.
And this persistent fear of failure, combined with immense overwhelm, leads straight into something called ADHD paralysis. This is a state where the physical, mental, or emotional load becomes so incredibly heavy that the brain quite literally goes into a freeze response. You've got a mountain of tasks in front of you, and your brain just stops working.
There's this analogy I absolutely love because it instantly validates the whole experience. It's not a lack of willpower, you know? Your brain is just overwhelmed with data. It's like having 100 browser tabs open, they're eating up all your processing power, and suddenly the whole system just crashes.
Listen, it's absolutely vital to understand the difference here between paralysis and standard procrastination. In procrastination, a person knowingly puts a task off. They're intentionally trying to generate a rush of cortisol and anxiety to motivate themselves to do it at the last minute. But a person in ADHD paralysis, they physically and mentally do not have the choice to just start. The brain has completely shut down.
So how does this actually show up? Depending on the situation, it usually hits in one of 3 ways. First, you've got total mental paralysis, where this thick, heavy brain fog just rolls in. Second is task paralysis, where you avoid a massive work project by suddenly furiously doing all the dishes or reorganizing your sock drawer. And third is choice paralysis, where you freeze completely when someone hands you a large, overwhelming restaurant menu.
Let's turn the page to part 3, when ADHD hides autism.
Get this, anywhere from 30 to 80%.
That massive range is the estimated percentage of autistic people who also meet the diagnostic criteria for ADHD. The complexity of ADHD very often masks other overlapping conditions, creating this deeply intricate and increasingly recognized intersection that we call ADHD.
But here's the catch, and it's a huge problem. Because our diagnostic systems are historically built on these strict either-or checkboxes, getting an early ADHD diagnosis actually drastically delays autism recognition. If ADHD is on the medical chart first, boys wait an average of 1.5 extra years for an autism diagnosis. The overall average delay is 1.8 years. And for girls, it's a massive 2.6-year delay. That is years of struggling without the right support.
So why does this happen? Well, it boils down to the fact that the loud, colorful nature of ADHD often completely drowns out the underlying autism. We call this phenomenon diagnostic overshadowing. The autistic traits are absolutely there, but they mistakenly get attributed entirely to the existing ADHD diagnosis.
To put that into perspective, let's look at how this plays out in everyday life. The outward behavior is real, but the clinical label totally misses the actual underlying autistic lead. For example, a child interrupting gets labeled with ADHD impulsivity, right? But the autistic reality might be that they're just missing social context cues. Constant motion gets called hyperactivity, when it's actually autistic stimming. A meltdown over a routine change is chalked up to emotional dysregulation, completely missing the deep autistic distress from unpredictability. And deep focus, that gets called hyperfocus rather than an autistic special interest.
Okay, let's look at some solutions with Part 4, Managing and Thriving.
Here's the really good news. ADHD is incredibly manageable. While everyone's personal journey is totally unique, medical treatments like stimulants, which target those exact dopamine pathways we talked about earlier, alongside dedicated behavioral therapy, are the proven cornerstones of success. They literally help millions of people function in daily life. And for day-to-day survival, especially when you're fighting off that paralysis, you can implement some incredible dopamine-boosting coping mechanisms. First, write everything down immediately to bypass those working memory issues. Break massive projects into tiny bite-sized tasks. Schedule healthy dopamine rewards for yourself, and make sure you're taking movement breaks to reset your brain. You can also designate specific times for your high-energy work, consciously try to let go of perfectionism, and constantly introduce novelty into your routine to fight off the monotony. Ultimately, by combining medical support, therapy, and environments that actually embrace this unique neurobiology, we really have to step back and look at the big picture. What incredible things could people with ADHD achieve if society finally stopped judging them by the wrong rulebook? Honestly, if we just stop forcing hunters to act like farmers, what kind of untapped potential could we unlock?